Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to learn building economics, which is RAR 609 as code. Today's topic is utility analysis, which is module 1 of our syllabus. When we use the term utility in general sense, we usually mean electricity or water or such basic supplies that we need to sustain. But here, when we talk about utility in economics, we denote the quality in a good or service by virtue of which our wants are satisfied. We can also say that the want satisfying capacity of a good is called utility. If we look at an example for utility, let's say you have a shirt. You want to buy it, you need it so that you can use it in your daily wear. So it would have a utility for you. Someone else may already have plenty of shirts and may not need to buy another one. So that shirt holds a lot less utility for that person than compared to you. Now imagine the same shirt, you have worn it now for a year or so and has become old. You do not want to use it anymore and its utility has reduced for you. But that same shirt may still hold high utility for someone who may be poor. For that person, if you donate this shirt, it would have a high utility for them. Hence, we even say that the power of a commodity or service to satisfy human want can also be called as its utility. Now let's discuss cardinal utility analysis. There is an analysis or the cardinal approach. This theory basically says that a consumer's behavior is based upon the concept of utility and it assumes that the utility is capable of measurements. Now imagine we spoke about a concept of shirt. Now how much do you want a shirt? Can you quantify it? It's difficult, right? But the cardinal utility analysis says we can actually put a number on it. Let's see how. Here, Fisher has used the term util as a measurement of utility, and he says that utility can be measured in cardinal numbers like 1, 2, 3, etc. Let's look at an example. It can be said that one gets 10 utils of a satisfaction from a cup of tea. Maybe someone will be wanting a cup of tea. They are fond of tea, so they get 10 utils of satisfaction. If to the same person you offer a cup of coffee instead, they may not be such a bigger fan of coffee. So this cup of coffee which has been provided instead of the cup of tea would only provide 5 utils of a satisfaction. Speaking about the same person, instead of tea or coffee, if you offer that person rasgulla instead, maybe they would get a higher satisfaction from that rasgulla. So we can roughly say that the rasgulla would give him 20 utils of satisfaction. See, It is all about comparison from one another. How much satisfaction it would give to a person compared to another. To understand utility better, let's understand its features first. We can say that utility is subjective, as we spoke in an example of the shirt. The utility for one person for an item could be different of a utility for another. Hence, we say utility is subjective because it deals with the mental satisfaction of a man. A commodity may have different utility for different persons. Let's take another example. A cigarette has utility for a smoker, but for a person who does not smoke a cigarette has no utility for it. That's why we say that utility is subjective. Utility is relative. It varies with place and time. Now, utility for an item may never remain the same. As we said, it varies from time and place. Let's take an example of an air cooler. Air cooler has utility in the summers, but not during the winters, right? So we changed the time and the utility for an item changed. Let's look at another example. Say a oil radiator. An oil radiator may have a very high utility in cold regions like US or Chicago or Manali in India. But same oil radiator may not have utility at all in southern India where it is not at all cold. Hence, we say utility is relative and it varies with place and time. We can also say that utility is not essentially useful. A commodity having utility need not be useful. Let's look at an example of cigarette or liquor. They are harmful to our health, but if they satisfy the want of an addict, then they have utility for him. For someone who doesn't use it, they may not have a utility. But for someone who is using it, they hold high utility and an addict would want them. That's why we say it is though not a useful item to our society, but it is still has an essentially high utility. Utility is even independent of morality. Utility of a liquor or opium may not be proper from the moral point of views. It is not good for a society, but these items satisfy the wants of their users who are common users for it. They have high utility for them. So these items have become a part of the economy. That's why we say even the items which are bad for ourselves have become an essential part of our economy because of people who hold utility for such items. Now, let us look at the types of utility. Here, we are going to discuss basically four types: the initial utility, total utility, marginal utility, and average utility. Initial utility. The utility which a consumer obtains by consuming 1 unit of a commodity is called initial utility. This initial utility is always positive. To understand it with an example, let's say you are having mangoes. When you start having mangoes, the first mango that you consume, it will give you an amount of satisfaction and it will satisfy an amount of utility. This is called initial utility. यानी जब आपने आम खाना शुरू किया तो पहले आम खाने पे जितना आपको satisfaction मिला, उस satisfaction को हम आपका initial utility कहेंगे. Total utility. The aggregate of utilities obtained from the consumption of different units of a commodity is called total utility. Looking at an example, we were looking at mangoes. So, when you have your first mango, it will give you a marginal utility of MU1. When you have your second mango, it will give you a marginal utility of MU2. The third will give you MU3 and so on. So, at any point of time, say you have consumed n number of mangoes, so your total utility after consuming n number of mangoes will be MU1 plus MU2 and so on till MUN. Or we can just say that TU is the summation of all the MU before the consumption of the one you are calculating your total utility for. यानी जब आपने पहला आम खाया तो आपको MU1 का satisfaction मिला, सेकेंड मैंगो पे MU2, थर्ड मैंगो पे MU3 और से पांचवे पे MU5. तो आपके पांचवें आम की टोटल यूटिलिटी हुई MU1 प्लस MU2 प्लस MU3 प्लस MU4 प्लस MU5. Marginal utility. The change that takes place in total utility by the consumption of additional unit of a commodity is called as marginal utility. That's why the formula of marginal utility for n number of objects consumed is equal to total utility for n objects consumed minus total utility for n minus 1 objects consumed. If we look at an example of mango, marginal utility for consumption of 5 mangoes is equal to the total utility received from consumption of those 5 mangoes minus the total utility received from consumption of n minus 1, that is 4 mangoes. यानी कि जब हमने आम खाए तो किसी एक आम को खाने का जो मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी है वो उस आम को खाने से आपको पूरा सेटिस्फैक्शन जितना मिला और उससे पिछले आम तक आपको कितना सेटिस्फैक्शन था उसके डिफरेंस से आपको पता चलेगा। मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी कैन बी पॉजिटिव, जीरो और नेगेटिव। यानी अगर आप आम खा रहे हैं तो पहले आम पे तो हमेशा आपकी मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी पॉजिटिव ही रहेगी, लेकिन आगे जैसे आप और आम खाते जाएंगे, एक पॉइंट आएगा जब हो सकता है किसी आम को खाने से आपको सेटिस्फैक्शन अब ना हो, और ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि आगे और आम अगर आप खाते रहें तो एक पॉइंट पे वो मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी उस आम के लिए नेगेटिव भी हो जाए। यानी you no more want to have mangoes and you sort of forcing yourself to have them. That is when your marginal utility becomes negative. Average utility. The satisfaction enjoyed by the consumer from per unit commodity consumed is called average utility. The formula is AU is equal to TU by Q, wherein Q stands for the quantity of units consumed. Now let's look at an example to understand clearly the relation between TU and MU, that is total utility and marginal utility. Let's take an example wherein you have gone to visit someone where you have been invited for lunch. Now they're serving lunch to you. Till you have started eating, your number of units consumed is zero. Hence, the total utility of satisfaction is zero, and marginal utility is also not applicable. When they serve you the first chapati, so your number of units consumed become 1, and maybe the first chapati has given you a satisfaction of 10 utils. So the marginal utility becomes 10 minus 0 is equal to 10. When they served you the second chapati, after its consumption, you may not have gotten the same amount of satisfaction from the second chapati as from the first one, because you were not as hungry anymore. So, from the second chapati, you may have gotten a satisfaction of 18 utils. So, your total utility is 18, and your marginal utility becomes 18 minus 10, that is 8 utils. Same way, when you were served the third chapati, it wouldn't give you the same satisfaction as the second or the first. So, your total utility may be only reached 24, and your marginal utility could have been only 6, which is 24 minus 18. Now, as you see, slowly utility for each chapati is decreasing. By the time you have the fourth chapati, the utility for this chapati could be only left by 2. So this fourth chapati gave you a utility of 2, and your total utility reached only 26. Now you may be quite full, and still maybe they would insist to have another one. So when you go for a fifth chapati, you may not have utility for it at all. Hence, the marginal utility for it is 0 and your total utility remains the same. Now I believe you must be quite full. So, by the time they serve you a 6 chapati on their insist, you may have it. But you did not need it at all. Rather, you would avoid it. Hence, your utility has now decreased. Your total utility for chapati has become 24 and your marginal utility has become 24 minus 26, which is minus 2. See how marginal utility has gone to 0 and then negative. Now let's say they insist for one more. So now it has even lesser utility for you. So your total utility for this item is become 21 and your marginal utility has become minus 3, which is 21 minus 24. See how total utility has 10 as first, which is your initial utility, and then it goes on increasing as long as the marginal utility is increasing. But as the marginal utility becomes 0, your total utility remains constant. And as your marginal utility becomes negative, your total utility starts to reduce. So, when your marginal utility is at 0, your total utility is at its highest peak. Let's look at this in a form of a chart. Now, looking at this chart, you can see that total utility has been denoted by a blue line and marginal utility by a red line. For better understanding of the relation between your total utility and marginal utility, we have some basic points. Like total utility is the summation of marginal utility. As we discussed already, that total utility at any point of time is sum of marginal utility that have happened before it. Marginal utility is the change in total utility. So, your marginal utility at any point of time is total utility at that point minus the previous total utility. When mu is positive, tu increases at diminishing rate. So here from 0 to 5, we have your mu as positive. And from this point to this point, we have your tu going up at a diminishing rate. When your mu is 0, your tu is maximum. So at this point, when your mu was 0, your tu was max. And when your mu became negative from this point to this point, where it was negative, your tu started to decline. That is the relation between total utility and MU. That is marginal utility. I hope this presentation has cleared your issues and your fundamentals on utility. Law of diminishing marginal utility. This law states that the more you consume a good or use a service, the less satisfied you will be with each successive use or consumption. As we had a look at our previous example where we were consuming chapatis, with each new chapati that you were consuming, you were less and less satisfied. Your marginal utility was decreasing with each chapati. That's what the law of diminishing marginal utility states. आप जितना एक गुड को या एक सर्विस को कंज्यूम करेंगे, उससे मिलने वाली सेटिस्फैक्शन उतनी ही कम होती जाएगी। यही अगर हम पिज्जा स्लाइस में देखें, मान लीजिए आपने एक पिज्जा मंगाया, फर्स्ट स्लाइस खाई, उससे आपको बहुत सेटिस्फैक्शन मिली, बट सेकेंड स्लाइस से आपको कम सेटिस्फैक्शन मिलेगी। थर्ड की सेटिस्फैक्शन आपकी सेकेंड स्लाइस से और कम होगी। इसी तरह हर स्लाइस से आपका सेटिस्फैक्शन अमाउंट कम होता जाएगा। एक पॉइंट आएगा जब आप और पिज्जा नहीं खाना चाहेंगे, उस वक्त आपका सेटिस्फैक्शन लेवल 0 हो जाएगा अगली स्लाइस के लिए। उसके बाद भी अगर आपको स्लाइस और स्लाइसेस खाना पड़े, मान लीजिए पिज्जा बच गया और आपको फिनिश करना है, तो अगली जो 2 स्लाइसेस होंगी उससे जो सेटिस्फैक्शन मिलेगा वो नेगेटिव भी जा सकता है। That is the law of diminishing marginal utility. इसलिए किसी भी ऑब्जेक्ट की या किसी भी गुड या सर्विस से मिलने वाली मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी जो है, ये हमें बताती है कि हमें कितनी सप्लाई देनी है किसी ऑब्जेक्ट की, या एक कंज्यूमर या एक कस्टमर जो आपका है वो कितना उससे सेटिस्फाइड होगा। इससे आपको अपने प्रोपोर्शंस या अपनी क्वांटिटी प्रोविजन डिसाइड करने में ये फ़ायदा करेगा कि आपको अपना प्रोडक्ट किस रेशियो में प्रोवाइड करना है, या अपने आइटम जो है कितनी एक टाइम पे प्रोवाइड करनी है अपने कस्टमर को। कोई भी कस्टमर अपनी गुड से मिली मार्जिनल यूटिलिटी से ज़्यादा उसके लिए पे नहीं करना चाहेगा। यानी आपने अगर किसी को 10 एप्पल दिए तो वो 10 एप्पल के लिए पे कर रहा है, क्या उसे उन एप्पल से उतनी सेटिस्फैक्शन मिलेगी, क्या उसे उतने एप्पल्स की ज़रूरत है, तो ही वो उस पर उतना पैसा खर्च करेगा। Otherwise, they will prefer not to buy. In such a case, you will have to provide a lesser quantity to them, for which they will be willing to provide the amount that you are demanding. एक और एग्जाम्पल लेते हैं। मान लीजिए 2 लोग एक ही कार को खरीदने गए हैं। पहले को जितनी उस कार की यूटिलिटी है, अगर उसे उतने ही मार्जिनल कॉस्ट पे वो कार मिल रही है, तो ही वो उस कार पे उतना अमाउंट लगाएंगे। यानी जितनी सेटिस्फैक्शन उसे वो कार खरीदने से मिल रही है, उतने ही बजट में उसे वो कार मिले तो ही वो उस पे पैसा लगाएगा। यहीं अगर दूसरे व्यक्ति को उस कार से उतनी सेटिस्फैक्शन नहीं मिली जितनी उसे उस पे पैसा लगाना है. यानी it is going out of budget for him and he is not willing to spend that much because the satisfaction he will receive from buying that car is not greater than the price he is being asked to pay for that car. Then he will prefer not to buy the car. इसीलिए ये laws या utility of an object will help you know what prices to determine for a good or a service. Once again, utility is the usefulness of a good or service, or we can say that it is power of a good or service to satisfy the want of men. Thank you.